"Don't look at me," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp against the wind. Her feet were bare, bruised and blue against the snow. But the rancher, this stranger with eyes like a winter sky, didn't listen. He fell to one knee in the mud and the filth of the town square, and his voice was the only warm thing in that godforsaken place. "Be my wife." The town of Dry Hollow, Montana, was a place where hope came to die. In the winter of 1874, it was colder than a grave. The wind didn't just blow, it clawed its way through your coat, down your shirt, and into your bones. People hurried through the market square, their faces grim, their words lost in plumes of frozen breath. But they all slowed down to look at the girl tied to the post. They always slowed down to look. Her name was Anna, and she was 20 years old, but she looked like 100 winters had passed over her. Her dress was ripped, her arms were a road map of purple and yellow bruises, and her hands were bound so tight the rope had dug into her raw skin. But it was her face they stared at. The left side was a mangled tapestry of burned flesh, a scar that pulled her eye down and twisted her lip into a permanent, silent snarl. Her father stood beside her, his belly full of cheap whiskey and his heart full of poison. He waved a bottle in the air, shouting at the crowd, "Who'll take her? A good, strong girl. She don't talk much, and she's a hard worker." His voice was a drunken slur. "I'll take the best offer. Any offer." Someone in the crowd yelled, "What happened to her face?" Her father spat on the ground. "Burned it, years ago. Stupid girl set the kitchen on fire. Killed her little sister, too. The pretty one." He gestured at Anna with the bottle. "This one's just damaged goods. Useless." The laughter from the crowd was sharp and cruel, like cracking ice. It washed over Anna, but she didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that flinching only made it worse. She kept her eyes fixed on the dirty snow beneath her feet, the only part of the world that didn't judge her. The cold was so deep she couldn't feel her toes anymore. It was just a dull, distant ache, like a memory of pain. Then a new sound cut through the noise. Boots, slow, heavy, deliberate. Spurs clinking with a soft, metallic rhythm. The crowd parted like water around a stone, and a man walked through. He was tall, dressed in a long wool coat that was dusted with snow, a wide-brimmed hat hiding his face. He stopped in front of Anna's father. He lifted his head and the entire square went quiet. His eyes weren't cruel or curious or filled with pity. They were just steady. He looked at Anna's father, his expression unreadable. "How much?" he asked. His voice was low and calm, but it carried over the wind. Anna's father blinked, swaying on his feet. You, you serious?" The stranger didn't answer. He just reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. He didn't hand it over. He threw it to the ground. It landed with a solid thud and the unmistakable clink of coins. A lot of coins. Her father scrambled for it, his greedy fingers fumbling with the drawstring. "She's yours," he grunted, not even looking up. The stranger nodded once. He stepped toward Anna and began to untie the ropes. His fingers were quick and sure. As the ropes fell away, she swayed, her legs weak from standing for so long. She clutched her raw wrist to her chest, her head still bowed. She wouldn't look at him. She couldn't. He knelt in front of her, and she felt him reach for her face. She jerked back, turning her head away, hiding the scar. "Don't look at me," she whispered. The words were barely audible, a ghost of a sound. He stopped. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he stood up, shrugged off his massive wool coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy and impossibly warm, smelling of pine and leather. It swallowed her whole, the hem dragging in the snow around her bare feet. He didn't stare. He didn't flinch. Instead, he dropped to one knee again. He leaned in close, his voice soft but clear enough for the whole silent town to hear. "You're beautiful," he said. And then he said the words that would change everything. "Be my wife." Anna's breath caught in her throat. The world stopped spinning. For the first time in 10 years, the shaking in her hands stopped. She dared to lift her eyes just for a second and met his gaze. He wasn't looking at her scar. He was looking at her. The whispers in the crowd died. The laughter was long gone. There was only the falling snow and the steady gaze of the man kneeling at her feet. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a touch so gentle it was like a question. He guided her forward, away from the post, away from her father, away from the life she had known. No one moved to stop them. No one said a word. And as they walked out of the square, the girl they called useless, the girl they called a curse, walked beside the only man who had ever looked at her and seen something worth saving. But Anna didn't know that this man wasn't just saving her from her father. He was running from something himself, and he was about to drag her right into the heart of his own storm. They walked away from the town without looking back. The stranger, he hadn't even told her his name, led a horse with one hand. His other hung loose at his side. He didn't try to hold her hand, didn't try to guide her. He just walked beside her, matching his long strides to her slow, pained steps. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions. In Anna's mind, the silence was screaming. It was the same silence that had followed the fire 10 years ago. She'd been just a girl, trying to make stew for her sick mother. A pan of grease, a sudden flare, and the world had turned to smoke and orange heat. She remembered screaming for her little sister Elsie, who was in the other room. She remembered hearing Elsie's small, confused voice call her name. And then, nothing. Just the silence. When Anna woke up, her face was wrapped in bandages and her sister was gone forever. Her mother followed a few weeks later, consumed by a grief so deep it stole the breath from her lungs. Her father, a man already hardened by a hard life, shattered into 1,000 pieces of bitterness and rage, and he aimed every single shard at Anna. "You should have died instead of her," he would say. It was a refrain, a constant whisper in her life. "The pretty one died, and I was left with you." She became a ghost in her own home, a living reminder of what he had lost. His words were worse than his fists, scarred and stupid. "No man will ever want you. Even the fire tried to take you. Should have let it." Those words were branded onto her soul, deeper than the scar on her face. Being sold in the town square was just the final verse of a song she'd been forced to listen to her whole life. She risked a glance at the man beside her. William, she'd heard someone in the crowd whisper his name. He walked with a purpose, his eyes fixed on the tree line ahead. He hadn't asked her a single question, not about her father, not about her past, not about the ugly, puckered skin on her cheek. It was this kindness, this deliberate lack of curiosity, that scared her the most. It felt like a trap. She pulled his coat tighter around her, the rough wool scratching her chin. The burn on her face began to sting in the sharp air, a familiar throb that kept her grounded in her own misery. She expected him to speak at any moment, to reveal the catch. People were never kind for no reason. Not in her world. Kindness always had a price. He must have felt her watching him. He slowed his horse, his gaze softening just a fraction as he looked down at her. Still, he said nothing. He just gave her space to breathe, space to exist without being judged or prodded. It was a strange, unsettling feeling. For a decade, every step she took was under the heavy weight of her father's glare. To walk beside someone without that weight felt like floating, and she was terrified of falling. The snow fell harder, dusting his hat and the shoulders of his shirt. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Anna felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear or pain. It was a tiny, fragile thing, and she was too afraid to even give it a name. But it was there, and it was enough to make her take another step. And another. The cabin was small, nestled in a grove of pine trees at the base of a mountain. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a welcome plume against the darkening sky. It was a simple place, but it was solid. It looked like it had been built to withstand a storm. When they reached the door, Anna froze. Her hand went to the latch, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. This was it. This was where the kindness would end and the payment would begin. William opened the door and stepped aside, holding it for her. He didn't push or prod, just waited patiently in the falling snow. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The warmth hit her first. A fire was roaring in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The room was clean and sparse, with a simple wooden table, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner, with a thick quilt folded neatly on top. A pot of stew was simmering over the fire, filling the small space with the scent of herbs and cooked meat. She stood in the middle of the room, still wrapped in his coat, feeling like a wild animal that had accidentally wandered into a trap. William moved around her with a quiet grace. He went to a side room and came back with a basin of warm water, a clean towel, and a bar of soap. He set them on the floor near the hearth. "For your feet," he said simply. He didn't look at her mangled toes, just at her face. Anna looked down. Her feet were swollen and purple, cracked and bleeding. The pain, which had been a distant throb, came rushing back in a wave of agony. She hadn't realized how much they hurt until now. She sank onto the hearth, the stone warm against her frozen skin, and slowly, painfully, dipped her feet into the steaming water. It was a pain so exquisite it was almost pleasure. He turned his back to her, giving her privacy, and began lighting the oil lamps. He did everything with a calm, measured efficiency that spoke of a man used to being alone. But his solitude didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Still, the knot of fear in her stomach wouldn't loosen. Finally, she had to ask, "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was a cracked whisper. "Is it because you pity me?" William stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a rugged jaw and lines around his eyes that spoke of things he'd seen. "No," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm doing this because you deserve to be treated like a person." The words hit her like a physical blow. A person, not a burden, not a monster, not damaged goods. A person. Her throat closed up and a sound escaped her lips, a choked, broken sob. The dam she had built inside herself over 10 long years finally broke. Her knees gave out, and she crumpled to the floor, burying her face in her hands as the tears came, hot and silent and unstoppable. She wept for her sister, for her mother, for the girl she used to be. She wept for the 10 years of cruelty and loneliness. And as she wept, William did something extraordinary. He did nothing. He didn't try to comfort her. He didn't touch her. He simply turned his back, went to the far side of the room, and began to sharpen a knife, giving her the dignity of falling apart in private. But as he worked, his back to her, his hand brushed against a loose floorboard near the wall. He paused. His eyes narrowed. He knelt down, and with the tip of his knife, he pried it up. Underneath, nestled in the dark space, was a small, ornate wooden box. It wasn't his. He had built this cabin with his own 2 hands. Every board, every nail was his. This box was a secret someone else had left behind. He opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay a silver locket. He picked it up. It was cold to the touch. He pressed the clasp, and it sprang open. On one side was a miniature portrait of a woman with sad eyes. On the other side there was an inscription. His blood ran cold as he read the name etched into the silver. It was a name from a past he had tried to bury, a past that was supposed to be dead and gone. And right below the name was a single, chilling word: Dry Hollow. He hadn't chosen this place by accident. He had been led here. And now he knew the girl weeping on his floor was not just a victim he had saved. She was a piece of a puzzle he had been trying to solve for years, and her arrival meant his past was no longer behind him. It was here. The cabin became a fragile sanctuary. The days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun over the snow-covered peaks. Anna began to heal, not just on the outside, but in the small, broken places deep inside. She learned the rhythms of William's life. He was a man of routine and quiet. He chopped wood every morning, his axe falling with a steady, powerful beat. He tended to his horse, a chestnut mare named Ghost, with a gentle patience that made Anna's chest ache. She started to help, at first in small ways. She swept the floor. She kneaded bread, the familiar motion of her hands a comfort from a life she had almost forgotten. She fed the chickens, their clucking a cheerful sound in the silent landscape. She and William rarely spoke, but their silence was no longer heavy. It was a comfortable quiet, filled with the small sounds of two people learning to share a space. But she still couldn't look at her own reflection. The small mirror that hung by the door remained a clouded, faceless enemy, and she still flinched whenever William's gaze lingered on her for too long. He never pushed. He never asked her about the scar, about her past, about anything. It was a kindness she was still learning to trust. One morning the sun broke through the clouds, filling the cabin with a pale, watery light. William had gone out to the barn early, and Anna, thinking she was alone, stood by the wash basin to clean her face. The scarf she usually wore to hide her burn had gotten damp, so she'd taken it off, leaving it to dry by the fire. The cool water felt good on her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment, just breathing. The cabin door creaked open. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. William stood there, his boots covered in snow, his face ruddy from the cold. He had stopped mid-stride, his eyes wide with surprise. He was looking right at her face, at the scar, raw and angry in the morning light. Everything froze. The air crackled with a sudden tension. Anna's breath hitched. A hot wave of shame and panic washed over her. "Don't look at me like that," she snapped, her voice trembling. She backed away from him, her hand flying up to cover her cheek. William's brow furrowed in confusion. "Like what?" "Like them," she spat, her voice thick with years of accumulated pain. "Like you're disgusted. You stare and you pity me, and you pretend not to. But you do. You all do." He took a step toward her, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Anna, that's not— You said I was beautiful," she cried, her voice cracking. "You lied. You hadn't seen me, not really. Now you have. Now you see what my father saw, what they all see. A monster." Her whole body was shaking, not from the cold, but from the terrifying certainty that this was the end. The kindness was a lie. The safety was an illusion. He would cast her out, just like everyone else. William didn't say another word. He closed the door softly behind him and walked toward her. Slowly, deliberately. She kept backing away until she hit the cold wood of the table. Trapped. "I said, don't look at me," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a hollow ache of despair. But he didn't listen. He stopped right in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He didn't look at the scar. He looked directly into her eyes, and he held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. Then he slowly lifted his hand. Anna flinched, bracing for a blow that never came. His touch was impossibly gentle. His warm palm cupped the unscarred side of her face. His thumb stroked her cheekbone, then moved slowly, deliberately, until it rested on the raised, jagged edge of the burn. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the revulsion. "I am not disgusted," he whispered, his voice a low rumble. "This does not make you a monster." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her skin. "It proves you survived." Tears leaked from under her closed eyelids. A sob caught in her throat. "Why?" she choked out. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's the truth." He paused, and then he did something that shattered the last of her defenses. He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss directly onto the scar. Not her lips, not her cheek. The very part of her she despised most in the world. The part she had hidden for 10 long years. Anna gasped, her eyes flying open. The world tilted on its axis. No one had ever touched her there with anything but revulsion. No one had ever shown it anything but disgust. To have it touched with such tenderness, such reverence, it was unthinkable. Her mind went blank. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. William stepped back. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned, walked back to the fire, and added another log, as if he hadn't just upended her entire world. Anna stood frozen by the table, her fingers tracing the spot on her cheek where his lips had been. It still burned, but for the first time, it wasn't from the memory of the fire. It was from the ghost of a kiss. A spark had been lit in the darkness, but as William stared into the flames, his own mind was racing. He'd found the locket weeks ago and had been trying to make sense of it. The woman in the portrait, he knew her. Her name was Eleanor Vance, and she had been the wife of the man who had ruined his life, a ruthless land baron named Silas Vance, the same man William had sworn to bring to justice. What was a locket with her portrait doing in this cabin, in Dry Hollow? He had come here following a cold trail, a whisper that Silas was expanding his empire into Montana. But this was too much of a coincidence. He looked over at Anna, who was still touching her cheek in a daze. The pieces were clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. He hadn't just saved a random girl. He had stumbled into the very heart of the web he was trying to destroy. And Anna, whether she knew it or not, was tangled in it with him. His mission for revenge had just become infinitely more complicated. Because now, it wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting her. Peace was a fragile thing, and it was shattered on a quiet Tuesday morning. Anna was outside, scattering feed for the chickens, the weak winter sun on her back. For the first time, she wasn't wearing her scarf. The air was still cold, but she found she didn't mind it as much anymore. She even hummed a little, a half-forgotten tune from her childhood. That's when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. A wagon, coming toward the cabin. Her blood ran cold. She knew with a sickening certainty who it was. She dropped the bucket of feed and ran. William met her on the porch, his face grim. He had seen it too. He had a rifle in his hand. Her father didn't bother with pleasantries. He hauled himself down from the wagon, his face bloated and red, his eyes narrowed with greed. He wasn't alone. Beside him sat another man, someone Anna had never seen before. He was thin and wiry, with a face like a hawk and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look like a drunkard from town. He looked dangerous. "There she is," her father boomed, pointing a shaky finger at Anna. "Playing house with the cowboy. Figured I'd come and check on my investment." William stepped in front of Anna, shielding her. The rifle was held loosely in his hands, but it was a clear threat. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice dangerously low. The thin man slid off the wagon seat with a reptilian grace. He ignored Anna completely. His eyes were fixed on William. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Look what the cat dragged in. I heard you gone to ground, Marshal. Didn't figure you for a place like this." Anna stared, confused. "Marshal?" William's body went rigid. His knuckles were white on the stock of the rifle. "You've got the wrong man," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The thin man chuckled. "Don't you lie to me, Kane. I'd know that face anywhere. Saw it on enough wanted posters." He took a step forward. "Silas Vance sends his regards. He's been looking for you. Seems you have something that belongs to him." Kane, not William. His name was Kane. The world tilted under Anna's feet. Her father looked back and forth between them, his drunken mind struggling to catch up. "What the hell is going on? I'm here for my money. This girl is my property." The thin man, whose name Kane seemed to know was Fletcher, waved a dismissive hand at him. "Your daughter is the least of our worries, old man. It seems she's shacked up with a man with a much higher price on his head." Fletcher's eyes gleamed. "Vance will pay a fortune to have you back, Kane. Dead or alive." "I paid you," Kane growled at Anna's father. "The deal was done." "The deal changed," her father snarled. "She's worth more now, living with a wanted man." He was playing a game he didn't understand, caught between two far more dangerous players. Fletcher pulled a pistol from his belt. "Let's make this easy, Kane. You come with me. We leave the girl and the old drunk to their squabbling." "No," Kane said. The word was flat, final. "Don't be a fool," Fletcher hissed. "You can't protect her. Vance will burn this whole territory to the ground to get to you." He gestured toward Anna. "He'll start with her." The threat hung in the air, colder than the wind. Anna felt a terror she hadn't felt even when she was tied to the post. This wasn't about her scar or her father's cruelty. This was something bigger, something darker. She had stumbled out of one nightmare and straight into another. Kane's decision was made in a split second. He wasn't just a rancher. He was something else. A marshal, Fletcher had called him. A man named Kane. A man on the run. He had tried to leave that life behind, but it had found him, and it had found Anna. He raised the rifle. "Get off my land," he ordered. Fletcher just smiled. "I don't think so." He raised his pistol. The shot was deafening in the silence. But it didn't come from Fletcher's gun. It came from the rifle in Kane's hands. He hadn't aimed at Fletcher. He'd aimed at the ground, kicking up a spray of dirt and snow just inches from the man's feet. It was a warning. Fletcher's smile vanished. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he whispered. He backed away slowly toward the wagon. "Vance will hear about this. He'll send more than just me next time. He climbed back onto the wagon seat, pulling Anna's stunned father up with him. This isn't over, he called out as the wagon lurched away. The dust settled, leaving only silence and the heavy weight of secrets revealed. Anna stood on the porch, trembling. She turned to the man she had called William, the man who had saved her, the man who had kissed her scar. But she didn't know him at all. Kane, she whispered. He lowered the rifle, his shoulders slumping. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared out at the road, at the empty space where the wagon had been. I can explain, he said, but his voice was heavy with the weight of his lies. He had bought her to save her, but he had also bought her because he recognized the look in her eyes, the look of someone haunted by Silas Vance. The locket had confirmed it. He had thought he could protect her, keep her separate from his war. He was wrong. By bringing her into his home, he hadn't saved her. He had just painted a target on her back. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. The silence that had once been comfortable was now thick with betrayal. Kane, she couldn't bring herself to call him William anymore, tried to explain. He told her a story in clipped, reluctant sentences. He had been a U.S. Marshal. He had been hunting a man named Silas Vance, a land baron who ruled his territory with an iron fist, a man who bought lawmen and left a trail of bodies in his wake. I got too close, Kane said, his back to her as he stared out the small window. Vance framed me for a murder, put a bounty on my head. I had to disappear. I came here to start over, to wait for a chance to clear my name. Anna wrapped her arms around herself, the warmth of the fire doing nothing to chase the chill from her bones. And the locket? She asked, her voice small. The one you found under the floorboards? Kane flinched. He turned from the window, his face a mask of exhaustion. It belonged to Eleanor Vance, Silas's wife. She tried to help me. She gave me evidence against her husband. He found out. He killed her. His voice was raw with a grief he had clearly carried for a long time. The official story was that she ran away, but I know he killed her. Why was her locket in this cabin? Anna pressed, a cold dread creeping up her spine. I don't know, he admitted. I think she must have hidden it here before he killed her. She knew he was coming for her. This cabin, it was part of an old homestead. It must have been a landmark she knew. It all felt too big, too complicated. Marshals, land barons, murder. It had nothing to do with her. And yet here she was, in the middle of it all. You lied to me, she whispered, from the very beginning. You weren't just a kind stranger. You had a reason. I wanted to protect you, he said, taking a step toward her. When I saw you in that square, saw what your father was, it was the same cruelty I saw in Vance. I couldn't walk away. Then I found the locket, and I knew you were connected somehow, even if you didn't know it. I thought if I kept you here, kept you safe, I could keep you out of it. You were wrong, she said. The fight was over. Fletcher would be back. This Silas Vance would send men. They would come here to this cabin, and they would come for him and for her. The next few days were a blur of tension. Kane was a different person. The quiet, gentle rancher was gone, replaced by a watchful, pragmatic man who checked the perimeter of the cabin every hour, who slept with a pistol by his bed. He tried to talk to her, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them, but she couldn't. The trust had been broken. Every kind gesture now felt like a calculation. The story of the fire began to haunt her dreams, but this time it was different. The memories were sharper, more vivid. She could smell the smoke, feel the heat. She saw her little sister Elsie, her face smudged with soot, her eyes wide with fear. But there was something else, a shadow in the doorway, a man's voice, not her father's, shouting, in a strange, metallic smell that wasn't wood smoke. She woke up one night, gasping for air, her heart pounding. The memory was so real. Elsie hadn't been in the other room. She had been right there beside her, and they weren't alone. She had to know. She couldn't stay in this cabin, waiting for a ghost from Kane's past to come and kill them. The answers weren't here. They were back in Dry Hollow, back at the place where her life had burned to the ground. That night, while Kane slept his fitful, restless sleep, Anna made a decision. She scribbled a hasty note on a piece of scrap paper. I have to know the truth. She pulled on a pair of old boots Kane had bought for her, wrapped herself in a thick cloak, and slipped out of the cabin. She took Ghost, the chestnut mare. The horse was loyal to Kane, but she was gentle with Anna. The moon was a sliver in the sky as she rode away from the cabin, away from the man whose lies were as dangerous as the truth she was seeking. She didn't know what she would find at the ruins of her old home, but she knew she would rather face her own ghost than be killed by his. The ride to Dry Hollow was cold and lonely. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every snap of a twig made her heart jump. She wasn't the same girl who had left this town. She was harder now, colder. She rode into the town under the cover of darkness and went straight to the place she had avoided for 10 years. The house was gone. Only a blackened foundation and a single skeletal chimney remained, clawing at the night sky. The snow had covered most of the debris, a soft white blanket over a decade of pain. She dismounted, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. The air was still and heavy with memory. She walked through the ruins, her mind racing, the fire. Her father had said it was a grease pan, but in her dream, she'd smelled something else, something chemical, like kerosene. She knelt down, her fingers brushing away the snow and ash near the base of the chimney, where the kitchen would have been. Her fingers hit something hard and metal. She dug at it, her nails scraping against the frozen dirt. It was a small, flat tin, rusted but intact. She pried it open. Inside, nestled in the dirt, was a child's toy, a small, carved wooden bird. Its paint faded and chipped. It had belonged to Elsie. Her sister had never gone anywhere without it. Why would it be here, buried in the dirt, in a tin box, as if someone had tried to hide it? Then she saw the other thing, a piece of folded oilskin paper. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. It was a deed, a transfer of property, the deed to her family's land. It had been signed over to a new owner just one day before the fire. The signature at the bottom was her father's. The name of the new owner made the air leave her lungs in a rush. Silas Vance. It wasn't a coincidence. Her father hadn't just been a drunk. He had been in business with the devil. He had sold their land to Vance. But why? And why did the house burn down the very next day? A floorboard creaked behind her. She spun around, her heart stopping. A figure emerged from the shadows of the ruined walls. It wasn't Kane. It was the town sheriff, a man named Miller, a man who had known her family her whole life, a man who had stood by and watched as her father tied her to a post. "You shouldn't be here, Anna," he said, his voice low. His hand was resting on the butt of his pistol. "What happened here, Sheriff?" she asked, her own voice shaking but firm. She held up the deed. "What was my father's deal with Silas Vance?" The sheriff's face hardened. "Some things are better left buried." "My sister is buried," Anna shot back, her grief turning to rage. "And I want to know why." "Your sister died in the fire," he said flatly. "It was an accident." "No," Anna whispered, the pieces falling into place with a horrifying click. "No, it wasn't." She remembered the shadow in the doorway, the strange smell. Her father hadn't been trying to put the fire out. He had been starting it. It was insurance fraud, or something worse. He burned his own house down. He killed his own daughter. "Go home, Anna," the sheriff warned, taking a step closer. "Forget what you found. It'll be the death of you." "You were here that night, weren't you?" she accused, her voice rising. "You knew. You all knew. This whole town let him get away with it." The sheriff's eyes darted around nervously. "You're talking crazy." But it wasn't crazy. It was the truth. Her father was a murderer, and the town had protected him. But the final piece of the puzzle was still missing. Why? Why would her father do it? And what had really happened to Elsie? If he was willing to kill one daughter, what had he done with the other? Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the night. Two riders moving fast. It was Kane, and he wasn't alone. Fletcher was with him, a pistol aimed at Kane's back. "Look what I've found wandering in the wood," Fletcher sneered, shoving Kane forward. He dismounted, his eyes landing on the deed in Anna's hand. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Clever girl. Figured it out, did you?" Kane looked at Anna, his face etched with worry. "Anna, I told you to stay at the cabin." She's a part of this now, Marshal, Fletcher said. She always was. He turned to the sheriff. Looks like we have a loose end to tie up, Miller. The sheriff drew his gun, but he didn't point it at Fletcher. He pointed it at Anna. He was one of them. He worked for Vance. The whole town was rotten to the core. Your father made a deal, Fletcher explained, clearly enjoying himself. He sold the land to Mr. Vance, but the real prize wasn't the land. It was what was under it. Silver. He smirked. And he sold something else too. A price for his gambling debts. The pretty one. Your sister, Elsie. Anna felt the world dissolve around her. What? She didn't die in the fire, little bird, Fletcher cooed. The fire was just a distraction to cover up her disappearance. Your father sold her to Vance. Traded her like cattle. Vance likes collecting pretty things. The burn on Anna's face throbbed. The memory became crystal clear. The kerosene. Her father dragging Elsie out of the house before the flames got too high. Anna had tried to stop him. She had screamed and fought, and he had backhanded her, sending her tumbling into the flames. The scar wasn't from the fire. It was from him. He hadn't just let her burn. He had thrown her into the fire to silence her. You were the loose end, Fletcher said with a grin. The one who saw too much. He was supposed to get rid of you, but I guess he didn't have the stomach for it. So he just beat you and broke you until you forgot, until you were too scared to ever speak the truth. All the years of cruelty, the names, the beatings. It wasn't because of his grief. It was to keep her quiet, to keep her broken. Now, Fletcher said, raising his pistol, Mr. Vance is a tidy man. He doesn't like loose ends. And you two, he gestured between Anna and Kane, are the last ones. Kane moved like a snake striking. He slammed his elbow back into Fletcher's gut, spun around and grabbed for the gun. The sheriff fired at Anna, but she was already moving, diving behind the crumbling stone of the chimney. The bullet sparked off the rock where her head had been. Gunshots echoed through the ruins. Kane and Fletcher were wrestling for the pistol, a brutal, desperate struggle in the dirt. The sheriff was advancing on Anna's position, his own gun ready. She was unarmed, trapped. But this was her ground. She knew every broken stone, every treacherous patch of ash. As the sheriff rounded the chimney, she kicked out, not at him, but at a pile of loose bricks. They tumbled down, catching him in the legs. He stumbled, giving her a precious second. She scrambled away, back toward the trees where she had tied Ghost. She had to get away. She had to tell someone. But who was there to tell? The law in this town was bought and paid for. Kane was a wanted man. They were alone. Another shot rang out. Fletcher screamed and fell back, clutching his shoulder. Kane had the gun. He turned and fired at the sheriff, who yelped and dropped his own weapon, grabbing his wounded hand. Anna, run! Kane yelled, moving toward her. But Fletcher wasn't done. He pulled a knife from his boot and lunged, not at Kane, but at Anna. She was closer, an easier target. Kane saw it, but he was too far away. He shouted her name. Anna turned just as Fletcher came at her, the knife gleaming in the moonlight. There was no time to think. 10 years of fear, 10 years of being a victim, boiled over into a single moment of pure, unadulterated rage. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She reached down, her hand closing around a jagged piece of burnt timber from the ruin of her home. It was heavy, solid. As Fletcher raised the knife to strike, she swung it with all the force of her pain and her anger and her grief. The wood connected with the side of his head with a sickening crack. Fletcher's eyes went wide with surprise. The knife fell from his hand. He staggered back, a look of disbelief on his face before he crumpled to the ground, silent and still. Anna stood over him, panting, the makeshift club still in her hand. The silence that followed was absolute. The sheriff was groaning on the ground, clutching his hand. Kane was staring at her, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. She had done it. She had fought back. The scared little girl who hid from the world was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in fire, and she was done being afraid. The dawn found them riding hard, away from Dry Hollow, away from the smoking ruin of Anna's past. They didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky, finding refuge in a hidden canyon Kane knew from his marshalling days. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and the raw, throbbing truth. Elsie was alive. Her sister, who she had mourned for a decade, was alive. She had been sold to the monster who had ruined Kane's life. The two separate, tangled threads of their lives had twisted together into one single, unbreakable knot. Vance has a fortified estate, Kane explained, tending to the graze on Fletcher's shoulder. They had tied him and the sheriff up and left them in the ruins. They wouldn't be found for a while. It's 2 days' ride from here, up in the granite peaks. It's a fortress. No one gets in or out without his permission. Anna stared into the distance, her mind racing. Then we're going to the granite peaks. It wasn't a question. Kane looked at her. The transformation was staggering. The timid, broken woman he had met in the square was gone. In her place was someone with a core of steel. Anna, it's not that simple. He has an army of men. We can't just ride in. I don't care, she said, her voice flat and hard. She's my sister. He's had her for 10 years. He's not having her for one more day. He saw the determination in her eyes, the same fire he had dedicated to his own quest for justice. He had been running, hiding, waiting for the right moment. But she wasn't going to wait. She was going to make the moment. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would not let her go alone. All right, he said, but we do it my way, smart, not loud. His plan was audacious, it was insane. He wasn't going to storm the gates. He was going to use the one thing Vance didn't know he had, an insider. He spent the next day writing a letter. It was coded, full of phrases and names that meant nothing to Anna, but he explained that it was for a man inside Vance's organization, another lawman who had gone undercover years ago, who Kane had presumed was dead. If he's still in there, and he gets this message, Kane said, he's our only chance. Getting the message to him was the problem. That's where Anna came in. She was the one person no one would be looking for. She was a ghost. She would ride to the town that had grown up around Vance's fortress, a place called Blackstone, and find a way to pass the message. It's too dangerous, he argued with himself, even as he laid out the plan. It's not as dangerous as doing nothing, she countered. She rode into Blackstone looking like just another drifter. Her scar, once her shame, was now her disguise. It made people look away, dismiss her. She found the saloon where Vance's men drank and took a job washing dishes, keeping her head down, listening. She learned the rhythms of the place, the names of the men, the whispers of Vance's cruelty, and she learned the name of his chief of security, the man Kane's letter was for. For 3 days, she worked and waited, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every footstep behind her felt like a threat. Every lingering glance felt like discovery. Finally, she saw her chance. She saw the security chief heading for the stables. She followed, her heart pounding. She accidentally bumped into him, dropping a pile of laundry. As he helped her, she slipped the note into his coat pocket, a move as smooth and quick as a card sharp. He didn't even notice. She fled back to the kitchens, her body trembling. Had he seen? Would he raise the alarm? Hours passed. Nothing. Had it worked? Or had she just signed their death warrants? That night, a message came back. Not in a letter. A stable boy, a kid with wide, nervous eyes, came to the back door of the kitchen. He handed her a small bundle of rags. A man told me to give this to the girl with the burned face, he mumbled, and ran off into the night. Anna unwrapped the rags. Inside was a key and a small folded piece of paper. On it was a crude map of Vance's estate in 2 words, the East Gate, midnight. It was happening. Kane met her on the outskirts of town. He had acquired dynamite from an old mining contact. He had his pistols, his rifle, and a look of grim determination. Ready? He asked. She just nodded. She was more than ready. She was on fire. The estate was even more formidable than Kane had described. A massive stone wall surrounded the compound, with armed guards patrolling the top. The east gate was a small, secondary entrance, used for service wagons, but it was still guarded. As they crept through the darkness, 2 figures emerged from the shadows near the gate. One was the security chief, The other was a young woman wrapped in a cloak, her face pale in the moonlight. She looked to be about 18, with wide, terrified eyes that looked so much like Anna's mother. It was Elsie. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run to her, to scream her name. But Kane put a restraining hand on her arm. This was the most dangerous moment. The security chief, whose name was Jonas, spoke in a low whisper. "I'll take care of the guards. You have 5 minutes to get her out of here. Vance is meeting with some associates on the other side of the compound. But when he finds out she's gone, he'll lock this place down tight." He nodded to them and slipped back toward the guard post. There was the sound of a brief, muffled scuffle, then silence. The gate creaked open. Jonas waved them through. Anna rushed forward. "Elsie?" she whispered. The young woman flinched, her eyes full of fear. She didn't recognize her. 10 years. A lifetime. "Who are you?" Elsie whispered. "It's me," Anna said, her voice breaking. "It's Anna, your sister." She reached out and touched the small wooden bird she had taken from the ruins, which she had tied on a leather cord around her neck. Elsie's eyes widened as she saw the bird, a flicker of recognition, a memory from a life before this one. "Anna?" The name was a fragile question. There was no time for a reunion. "We have to go. Now," Kane urged, pulling them toward the horses he had hidden nearby. They got Elsie onto a horse and were just about to mount their own when all hell broke loose. Shouts from the wall, a gunshot. An alarm bell began to clang, a death knell in the cold night air. Someone had found the guards. Jonas had been discovered. "Go!" Jonas yelled, appearing at the gate, a pistol in his hand. "I'll hold them off!" He began firing back toward the main house, buying them precious seconds. Kane didn't hesitate. He pulled Anna up onto his horse, grabbed the reins of Elsie's, and spurred them into a gallop. They charged into the night, the sounds of gunfire and shouting fading behind them. They rode like the devil himself was on their heels. Because he was. Silas Vance now knew his most prized possession was gone. And he knew the ghost who had been hunting him for years, Marshall Kane, had come back from the dead to take her. The hunt was on, and Vance would not stop until he had them all back. Dead or alive. They rode for 2 days straight, pushing the horses and themselves to the brink of collapse. They didn't dare stop, didn't dare light a fire. Kane knew Vance's trackers were the best in the territory. They would be relentless. Elsie was in a state of shock, quiet and withdrawn, the years of captivity having stolen her voice. But sometimes Anna would catch her sister staring, a dawning recognition slowly breaking through the trauma. They made it back to the small cabin, the only home Anna had ever known that wasn't a prison. But it was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. "He'll know I came from this area," Kane said, pacing the small room. "Fletcher will have told him. He'll scour every homestead within 100 miles. "So we run?" Anna asked. "No," Kane said, his jaw set. "I'm done running. We've got Elsie back. Now we end this, on our terms." His plan was born of desperation and a marshal's cunning. He knew Vance wouldn't just send a few men. He would come himself. Vance was arrogant. He would want to look Kane in the eye as he killed him. They would use that arrogance against him. They would fortify the cabin. They would make their stand here. And they would need help. Kane sent Anna into Dry Hollow not as a victim, but as a messenger. She went to the few people in town who had shown her small kindnesses over the years. The baker's wife who had slipped her bread. The blacksmith who had averted his eyes in shame. She told them everything. About her father, about the sheriff, about Vance and the silver, and about her sister, alive after all these years. At first they were scared. Vance's reach was long. But the story of one of their own, sold and betrayed, lit a spark of defiance in the downtrodden town. The final straw was Anna's father. He had returned to town drunk and bragging, telling everyone how he had sold his daughter not once but twice. The townspeople, their guilt finally boiling over into anger, turned on him. They ran him out of town on a rail, a final public humiliation. That's when they decided to fight. The blacksmith, the baker, a half-dozen ranchers from the hills. They weren't an army, but they were angry and they were armed. They rode out to Kane's cabin. They had 1 day to prepare. They barricaded the windows, set up firing positions in the woods, and laid traps along the main path. Kane, Anna, and Elsie worked side by side. In the midst of preparing for war, the two sisters finally began to talk. Elsie told Anna of the horrors of the last 10 years, a life as Vance's personal property, locked away and isolated. And Anna told Elsie about her life, the cruelty, the loneliness, and the man who had shown her that her scars didn't define her. As they loaded rifles, their hands touching, the decade of silence between them finally fell away. They were sisters again. Vance arrived at dusk. He brought 20 men, hard cases with rifles and no mercy. They surrounded the cabin, their dark shapes moving through the trees. Vance himself sat on a fine black horse, just out of rifle range, a silhouette of pure evil against the blood-red sunset. "Kane!" he bellowed, his voice echoing across the valley. "I know you're in there. You have something that belongs to me. Send out the girl and I might let you live." A shot from the trees was Kane's only answer. It hit the ground in front of Vance's horse, making it rear up. The battle had begun. The first wave of men charged the cabin. Gunfire erupted from all sides. The townspeople, hidden in the woods, opened fire, catching Vance's men in a crossfire. The attack faltered. Two of Vance's men went down. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Kane was a whirlwind of motion, firing his rifle from the window, shouting orders, his marshal's training taking over. Anna was right beside him, reloading rifles with a speed and calm she never knew she possessed. Elsie, though terrified, was in the back room, melting lead to cast new bullets. Each of them had a part to play. The fighting was brutal and close. Vance's men were professionals and they pushed forward, using the trees for cover. The sun went down, plunging the battlefield into darkness, lit only by the muzzle flashes of the guns. One of the ranchers went down, a cry of pain cut short. The tide was turning against them. Vance, enraged, ordered his men to burn them out. They came forward with torches. This was it. The moment it all ended in fire, just like it began. But Kane had been waiting for this. As the men with the torches got close to the cabin, he gave a signal. One of the ranchers lit the fuse on the dynamite Kane had planted earlier. The explosion was immense. It tore through the attacking line, sending men and fire flying. The charge was broken. In the ringing silence that followed, Vance, mad with rage, did something no one expected. He spurred his horse forward, charging directly at the cabin himself, a pistol in his hand. He was coming for Kane. Kane stepped out onto the porch to meet him. This was between them now. The two men fired at the same time. Kane grunted, a red stain blossoming on his side. Vance cried out and tumbled from his horse, his legs shattered. He tried to crawl to reach his fallen pistol, but a figure stepped out of the cabin door, blocking his path. It was Anna. She held a pistol in her hand, and her aim was steady. "This is for my sister," she said, her voice clear and cold in the night air. Behind her, Elsie appeared in the doorway. She looked at the man who had stolen her childhood, her face a mask of cold fury. "And this is for me," she said. The remaining of Vance's men, their leader down, their numbers decimated, lost their nerve. They faded back into the woods, abandoning their master to his fate. The battle was over. The sun rose on a changed world. Vance and the corrupt sheriff were in custody, their reign of terror over. The town of Dry Hollow had found its courage. Kane, his side bandaged, was no longer a wanted man. The testimony of the townspeople and his undercover friend Jonas, who had survived the fight at the estate, cleared his name. He was a hero, but the real victory was quieter. It was in the way Anna and Elsie sat together on the porch of the cabin, talking softly, rebuilding the years that had been stolen from them. It was in the way Anna could now look Kane in the eye, not as a savior, but as a partner. A few weeks later, they stood under the big oak tree behind the cabin. Spring had come to the valley. The snow was gone, replaced by a carpet of green grass and wildflowers. "It's over," Anna said, her voice full of a peace she had never known. "It's a beginning," Kane corrected her. He took her hand. It wasn't the hand of a broken girl anymore. It was the hand of a survivor, a warrior. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother. He had given it to her once in the snow as a promise. Now it was something more. He didn't kneel this time. He stood before her as her equal. "Anna," he said, his voice thick with emotion, You are the strongest person I have ever known. You saved me as much as I ever saved you. Be my wife." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears, not of sorrow, but of a joy so profound it was almost painful. She looked at her sister Elsie, who was smiling at them from the porch. She looked at this land, this home, that had been bought with blood and courage. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit. In a world that tried to define her by her scars, Anna chose to define herself by her strength. Her story and Kane's isn't just about survival. It's about taking the broken pieces of your life and building something beautiful, something unbreakable. It's a reminder that true love doesn't try to fix you. It gives you the strength to fix yourself. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. What do you think is the true meaning of strength? And if you believe that even the deepest wounds can heal and that love can be found in the most hopeless of places, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more tales of love and survival on the frontier, and ring that notification bell. Because even after the longest, darkest winter, the sun will always rise again.